Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name's Josh Odgers. I'm the host of Online with an Architect. Very happy today to have Stanimir Markov with us. Welcome, Stan.
Great to be here. Thanks, Josh.
Fantastic. So for those of you who don't know, Stan and I worked at IBM together a long time ago when we were quite a bit younger. So opposite sides of the world, but we were at IBM together with Michael Voigt as well. So we actually had three VCDX architects in the company. So IBM were very lucky and very unfortunate to lose all of us, obviously, ultimately.
They were lucky for a short period of time, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. But nonetheless, jokes aside, it is great to have you here, Stan. So look, today, obviously, we've talked about, we're going to talk a little bit about your VCDX journey first. So maybe if you can do a quick intro of yourself, and then, just talk us through your VCDX journey.
Yeah, first of all, thanks again for having me. It's great to catch up. Great to catch up actually on the podcast. The VCDX journey was one that was one of the most exciting for me. I think in professional life, it's always great to be challenged, and because we're spending a big portion of our life at work, in our professional side, and for me, VCDX was something really challenging. I think in general it is. It's a great achievement. It's a lot of things you have to learn, a lot of things you typically have to develop in yourself until you actually are ready to get that title. And I remember that I eyed this big milestone very early when I started working with VMware, which was back in maybe 2007. And at the time, there were maybe 20 or 30 VCDXs out there. So it was really just a handful of people. And there was a lot of mystery around the certification as well. So there was not much information online on the different steps, the different exams you have to take. Even the defense itself, it was kind of covered in mystery. So, but as one of the kind of goals I set for myself is to really pursue this goal. And I knew that it might take years or it might take really long time, but I thought that I will learn a lot throughout the journey and it would really open a lot of opportunities for me. And that's exactly actually what happened. But very early on when I started actually working with VMware is when I decided to go for the VCDX journey. And then I mapped out all the milestones, all the exams I have to take, but also all the things I have to learn. And in fact, that's when I used mind mapping the most, because I just put like VCDX in the center and was the goal, and then started branching out. Okay, what do I need to do? I need to improve my presentation skills. I need to take the necessary exams. I need to learn everything from these areas of virtualization. I need to become a better architect and learn better the methodology of being an architect. And so there were a lot of things that came out of this mind mapping. And so I took a very, I would say, calculated way on how to get there. Of course, what helped the most is the fact that at my work, I started to do from operations type of work to more architect type of work. And I started to get involved in projects when I had to build the architectural designs and to take some architectural decisions to describe constraints, requirements, assumptions, and things like that. So all of these things that are part of the in general VCDX or architect methodology. So it took some time. Certainly, I'm not sure, maybe a couple of years or so, but I was very happy to get there in the end. It's even a bit hard to believe to be part of that group of people once you get the certification. But I should say that. Maybe you could also share your experience with this, but what this teaches you and the way you do your architectural thinking and really taking calculated decisions based on sometimes limited information is something that you can apply in your everyday life. And in a lot of things you do, doesn't necessarily have to be infrastructure design. It can be anything else, but I really try to apply this methodology of taking decisions in a informed in a calculated way and in a repeatable way, right? You can document why you've taken certain decisions and then go back to the assumptions you've taken and maybe change them, and maybe the decision will be different in that case. So yeah, to sum up, I would say that I definitely learned a lot, and it's a lot of things that I apply now in my current role, also at Runecast, from this VCDX path I took.
Yeah, I mean, you've touched on a few points that that certainly I felt in my journey was very similar, and also some of the earlier guests. Everyone talked about great learning opportunity to try and learn or find out what you don't know, so you can plug those gaps. Repeatability is another thing you just mentioned. Very common amongst VCDXs. We talk about creating repeatable models, or architecture which is scalable and things like that. And of course, yeah, documenting all the requirements, constraints, assumptions, and risks, and the methodology in doing it. And for sure, I think I've had 3 or 4 guests talk about applying a similar methodology outside of the workplace, for day-to-day goals and things like that. So I couldn't agree with you more. Actually, you've hit the nail on the head. So very common comments from many guests so far. So.
Yeah, and I think this is something that at least this methodology of taking and documenting decisions is something that everybody should actually learn. I was even thinking of running like some lightweight courses within Runecast on how to do that, at least to document the reasons why you've taken certain decision, because you've probably come across this as well. A lot of people can't tell you for sure why they've decided on certain way, or why they like one or alternative over the other. It's I don't know, when it comes to them, it's kind of like a gut feeling, or they point out one of the reasons, but they don't have really a more exhaustive way to describe why they've come to a certain decision.
Absolutely. And look, in my career, for sure, once I started down my VCDX journey, one of the things I focused on was making sure that, like on my blog, I have the example architectural decisions. I made sure that every decision I was making for my own career development, as well as for the documentation set, that I would fill out that table for each decision. And what I found was it was very good in a lot of ways, and it was kind of annoying in other ways, but mostly very positive, because I would always have a minimum of 2 alternatives.
Yes.
Any decision. And then I would always justify that, well, option A was better than option B and C for these reasons. And if I'd gone with option B or option C, these would have been the implications down the track. What I found bad about that, unfortunately, was a lot of the time there was a bit of pushback, because people would go, "Oh, Josh, you're kind of always right." Like, and it wasn't my intention to be right. It was just my intention to make a good recommendation.
Yeah.
But some people would push back. But because I'd done such comprehensive work, mostly for my own benefit, for learning, actually, I had the answers to any objections. I actually found that was a consultative thing that I had to learn a bit more, was try to sugarcoat that message a little bit, because even though I know I've done the work and the research and I've discovered what's probably the best approach, it's the way I communicate that decision which is equally as important, because you don't want to, offside anyone or upset anyone. So I think that's a consultative skill that my VCDX journey sort of helped me learn as well. And obviously I'm not perfect at that still to this day, but I do my best.
I don't know if anybody is. It's very difficult when you know what the right answer is, and to try to not say it directly, to try to deliver it in a very soft way.
Yeah,
and,
that's right.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, luckily in my role as CEO, I don't, let's say, have to sugarcoat things too much. Maybe when I'm speaking to customers sometimes, but everybody expects me to be direct, which is very easy for me. It takes off some pressure of sugarcoating. But I remember one of my last projects at IBM, it was for a big European bank, and I had to redesign everything. They were also migrating data centers, but they wanted to have like a new common design for the different countries, because for each country that this European bank was covering, there were different architects, so they had their own ideas on how things should be. So I had to persuade each one of them who was considered, the top technical guy in their country, that this is the better way to do it. So
Mm.
when you're saying this, that's the first thing that comes to mind. That I was dealing with several countries, several top guys that I had to gently tell them, okay, well, this is the way we're going to do things. So
Yeah,
it's
it's
challenging.
certainly challenging, and to this day, I still find that challenging. But it's a good challenge. I like to think that when I make a recommendation, it's well justified and it is in the best interest of the customer. So, at least I go in confident that I'm doing the right thing, even if the customer ultimately chose a different route. At least I've
Yeah.
given them sort of that best effort. But I remember a very specific meeting I went into where the sales team came to me and said, "Oh, look, Josh, we've got this very important account. Can you please review the architecture and set the customer's mind at ease that this is going to work for them and deliver the outcomes they want?" And I said, "Oh, of course, I'm happy to help." So I read through the documents and I was like, "Oh my God, this is not going to work at all." Like I
I
said to
know.
the sales team, I was like, "Let me cut to the chase. This is not going to work. Let me design something that will for you."
Yeah.
And they're like, "We've already sold it. It's been delivered. The hardware's on the floor." And I'm like, "Okay, we're going to have to add significant amount of, you know, different hardware, software, whatever,
Yeah.
to this solution to sort of
Mm.
mix and match and make it sort of function." And they're like, "You can't say that." I said, "Look, I can't lie to them. What am I going to say? It's going to work great and it's not." So those situations, I don't enjoy from a
Yeah.
consulting perspective. I do
Mm.
enjoy them from a challenge perspective in terms of seeing what I can do to improve the situation. But
Yeah.
yeah, certainly I've had a few of those situations in my career where you've
Me
got to
too.
deliver really bad news and the outcome is the least worst option effectively instead of the best option. So yeah, unfortunately, as lead architects, we get in those situations occasionally.
Yeah, especially as if you get involved after the sale has been done, that's the most common one. And yeah, I've been to a few of those as well. Yeah, it's funny that I also was an architect for a big clinic that was being built in the Emirates,
Mm.
and the customer was sold everything from the Virialize suite in general, everything you can imagine, and they just said I like the only requirement they gave me when I initially arrived was I want the cloud, so you have to give me the cloud. So, and that was it. Like, so part of the task was to somehow find requirements and needs they have to kind of include as many products as possible from the whole suite, so that they don't feel like they you know overpaid for something. So yeah,
Yeah.
that
You've kind
was
of got to include as much as you can without making it overcomplicated as well. So you've
yes.
got a balance between the two. So yeah, that's an interesting one.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of fun challenges to solve, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great job being an architect, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I really enjoy it. Hence, we're here talking today as architects. So what I thought we'd jump into next is a topic that I think we're both pretty passionate about. I've also had an earlier guest, Chris Muchler, who's another VCDX. Um, we all love talking about day two operations and day 365 and onwards. So I know that's a lot of your background is operations, and that's a lot of your expertise. Can you maybe run us through some of the common things you see as problems in the industry over your extensive career?
Um, yeah, I think one of the biggest problems, and actually that's also one of the reasons that we've started Runecast, is apart from being an architect, one thing that I did is I built together with my colleagues what we called VMware Center of Excellence within IBM. We are based in the Czech Republic, but covering EMEA and some parts of US, and we did a lot of operations work and making sure that the customer environments are up and running, optimized, secure, especially environments running VMware. And we had to troubleshoot a lot of problems along the way, firefight really in some cases like outages or some other really drastic performance or security issues. And we've actually realized at some point that most of the problems that we have to deal with they're based on some root cause that's already documented somewhere in a knowledge base article or some blog article online, or some other online piece of information that's typically used reactively, only after you spend hours or days or even weeks of root cause analysis and troubleshooting. So that's one thing that, at least back in the day, and I see a lot of organizations still do it, is they have quite a reactive approach to managing their environment. So they have kind of up and down monitoring, and really some monitoring that will tell them only things that already went wrong, and would not really tell them what's going on, what is the root cause, and how to fix it. So this is something that we've seen over and over again over the years. And yeah, we just at some point realized that there should be a better way of doing that, because the information is already available somewhere online. Of course, it's difficult to find, but we should somehow find a way to proactively use it. And
Yeah, I mean, there's one really good example of what you're talking about is every time I do a design, and this is true to this day, I always look at the HCL and just check that the hardware,
yeah,
and the software is compatible and interoperable. So obviously there's
yeah,
the interoperability matrix and there's the HCL.
yeah,
And I feel like that step is missed so often.
yeah,
And even if you're looking at, say, vSAN OSA versus vSAN ESA, there
yeah,
are some slight differences, or there's a big difference in the architecture, but there's some slight difference in supportability and compatibility. So if a person doesn't check the HCL, or they don't buy a ready node, then you might actually buy the wrong thing and end up in a
yeah,
situation you've got to sort of fix that up. So that's probably the most common thing that I see is people go through an upgrade cycle, or they want to go through an upgrade cycle, and they get halfway through and they realize it's not compatible or it's not
yeah,
supported. So
exactly.
I've seen that just countless times, even with firmware, drivers, all this kind of stuff. So common, just endless issues over a firmware release. Like
Yeah,
it's
yeah. And that's one of the worst things, that you actually buy something and then you realize that you can't actually use it because it's on the HCL. Or in some cases, we see that it's also pretty bad that if you upgrade and you actually don't make sure that everything is on the HCL, in combination, driver, firmware, IO device model, and so on. You might realize it only if something really bad happens, like a purple screen of death or some other serious issue. And these are very difficult to actually to diagnose. That the fact that you didn't have everything compatible is actually the problem. So it very few things can actually lead you to find that this is the root cause. And it's pretty time taking exercise to make sure that, especially if you have a large environment with a varying types of IO devices, server models, which happens, right? Because I mean, when you kind of continue to grow your environment, or you acquire different companies with different infrastructure and you just join together, you end up with very different types of hardware and IO devices. So it's very difficult without having an automated process to actually make sure everything is compatible. And we've seen actually a lot of customers that have some repetitive serious issues like outages or even some performance problems, that in the end it turned out to be some incompatible driver, firmware, or IO device. So that's the reason why we also included that in Runecast. So not only is Runecast checking your current setup, whether the server, BIOS, IO devices, driver, firmware combination, all of it is compatible. Also taking into account the specific vSAN HCL, which is of course separate from the vSphere one, and it's more limited. But Runecast is making sure that all of it is compatible, but also it gives you the possibility to simulate upgrades. So before you actually go and upgrade to, let's say, vSphere 8, you could just do the upgrade simulation, see if everything will be green, or if there will be some driver firmware combination that you need to take care of. Hopefully, all the hardware stuff would be on the HCL, so you can go ahead with the upgrade. But there might be some additional steps like updating some IO device firmware or the BIOS of the server that you need to do just prior or after the upgrade. So So this is actually a huge, huge value proposition for customers. And the reason is everybody runs into this pain, especially if you have a larger environment, you're in constant mode of upgrades. You upgrade one cluster, then the next week or in a couple of weeks, you upgrade the other one until you're finished with your few hundred hosts. There's another version that you have to upgrade to. So that's
Sort of like
certainly,
painting the Golden Gate Bridge, right? You start at the start. By the time you painted it, you've got to restart painting it again. So absolutely. I
exactly.
was going to give you an example actually, because I had an environment recently where customer, quite common scenario, they had just a ton of different clusters, different hardware types and ages, and different ESX versions, and they're looking at sort of replacing some or all of that. Um, One of the environments was on an unsupported version of ESX, and then the hardware was different. And then another version was going out of support on a different set of hardware.
Well,
And
yeah.
then they wanted to propose a new set of hardware to either consolidate all of them or to at least complement the environment. So, just to completely put you on the spot, this is not rehearsed for anyone listening. I thought I'd give Stan a bit of a challenge. Can you run us through that scenario? What would Runecast do? And is there anything that Runecast maybe wouldn't do as well that we would have to still do as architects?
So that's an interesting challenge for sure. And are these within the this mixture of so the challenge is that some of them are, I mean, the hardware itself is not on the new version, and the yeah, and the new one is. So
So I guess
are
there's like
there?
three scenarios. There's old hardware that
Yeah,
may or may not be supported.
mhm,
And I don't know in this
yeah,
specific example I'm thinking of. Like obviously, I won't name the customer, but
yeah,
they've got an older ESX version.
yeah,
I think it's like 6.5 or something. It's quite old.
yeah,
Then they've got a 7.x, and then they want to go to 8. So
mhm,
from a hardware perspective, from
yeah,
a hypervisor perspective, and from a VM perspective,
yeah.
could you maybe talk us through what that process might look like? Just high level. I don't want
Sure. And
to.
probably the best would be, maybe I can even share my screen just to show you how easy it is with Runecast to actually validate as a first step. It's just it would take them maybe a minute to do that. And let me see. Yeah, you should be able to see my screen now.
Yes,
So
we can.
what we see here is just the login screen of Runecast. So Runecast, you could deploy it on-prem as an OVA. It's about 2 gigs, or you could run it as SaaS. But once you deploy it, set up the IP, you could already see the screen, and you can just log in. And by the way, for those that are watching or listening, you could play with Runecast also if you just go to demo.runecast.com. I'm proud of the fact that we have an actual online working demo, so anybody can play with it and see what we offer. So it's not hidden behind NDAs or marketing messages.
Yeah, fantastic.
But
That's a really good feature, actually. I think that's something more vendors should do is be very transparent about their products.
yeah, I think so. Yeah, because sooner or later people would know, right? What you have to offer. So it's better, I think, if it's sooner, so they could make the right choice. So yeah, here we see the main dashboard of Runecast. We've already connected here some vCenters, some also Kubernetes clusters, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud accounts, and Windows Linux operating systems. So Runecast is helping you prevent problems and ensure compliance across your entire hybrid multi-cloud. But of course, our bread and butter, where we started, is VMware. So
Mm.
what I want to show you is the hardware compatibility analysis. So I'm just going to click on hardware compatibility. And here I have a couple of vCenters and
Mm.
all of the hosts. On the right hand side, some of them are green, some of them are red. So I want to maybe look at one of the red ones that would, I want to see what is incompatible there. And I see that everything seems to be fine with the server itself. So the combination of partner, model, CPU series, number of sockets, ESXi release, and BIOS as a combination, as a chain of situations or parameters, that's all on the HCL, which is great. But if I look at IO devices, most of them are fine. One of them is marked in red. So if I just expand on the red IO device, I can see that all the IDs, brand name, model, device type are compatible with the particular ESXi release, which in this case is 6.5. So just like in the example you mentioned, the driver and firmware, though, the combination of those is not compatible when you also consider the ESXi release, IO device, model, device type, and so on. So
So
Runecast
we're really
is
quite deep here. We're looking at interoperability. We're not just looking at one device or one version. We're looking at the whole life of the
exactly, yeah.
environment.
That's exactly what I was going to say. That it's not just going to tell you, well, this firmware is on the HCL or this device is on the HCL. No, it looks at all of it as in an interoperability kind of way. So as a bundle or as a chain of things, and making sure that all of it in a group is together compatible.
Yeah,
So
I mean, already, I mean, fully transparent for all the listeners. I've never actually seen the Runecast product until literally right now. So this is my very unedited thoughts. But what springs to mind straight away is when I do a current state assessment of a customer, I want to know things like this. And if I have to do this manually, which I do, it does take some time. It is good sometimes to do things manually and to validate things manually, but to have a tool like this, which would tell me straight away that in the example I gave you that, one type of host needs new firmware or has an IO device which is not supported, I think is a really great value. It would certainly save time, and it would also probably prevent some human error because I'm only human. So if I go
yeah.
through or my team goes through and does a current state assessment, you can miss things. So I think this is a really good start for a current state assessment.
Exactly. Thanks. And I've done a lot of these as an architect, actually. So I would have loved to have something like Runecast, not just from the hardware compatibility analysis, but I can show you later. We have best practice analysis and a lot of the things that you have to validate as in this initial assessment and fit gap analysis. So this definitely would help you with the initial assessment, and it's of course good to run it continuously to make sure that whatever changes happen, both in your environment or in the external circumstances, like the HCL is changing all the time, so our best practices, knowledge base articles, vulnerabilities, you can continuously ensure that you're optimized and secured the whole time. But yeah, here looking at what is reported for this particular server, the problem is not so severe. I mean, it can lead to really serious problems, unexpected sometimes, like purple screen of death or performance degradation and so on. But here you can solve it quite easily. So you could just update the firmware, for example, or the driver, and here you have the recommended driver firmware combinations.
So I
Of
think this is
course,
a great example of making sure that in preparation for an upgrade, the chance of success goes from 50% maybe to a 98% chance of
exactly.
success. And I think that's the value, because if we think operationally, we have to have change windows, we have to go to change review boards and approvals and things like this. For customers or for architects like us who have to show those change review boards what we're going to do,
Yeah,
if we have a tool like this which highlights we're going to do each of these steps to make sure we're compatible at the point of the upgrade, I think getting approvals will be easier. Especially some customers have very strict
yeah.
change boards
Mhm.
review processes. So I certainly think this will help in a lot of cases.
Yeah, yeah, especially showing the why. Okay, you're gonna do this, but why? Well, you can see why it's red. It can cause big problems. So it's an easier way also to get approvals on this.
Mm.
Also, some of the capabilities we offer in Runecast is we have remediation scripts for hundreds of the problems that we detect. And these remediation scripts that are customly generated, they are well documented as well. And also, the reason why I'm mentioning that is a lot of these changes you would want to do within maintenance windows, and you'll have some change control, and you need to collect approval. So the reason why we also have our scripts so well documented is that everybody that's maybe approving the change can see exactly what's going to happen and why. I think you'll find as you're going through Runecast, a lot of the way we develop things are very much with our kind of IBM mindsets and really working in an enterprise environment. And proactively thinking about what an enterprise customer would need. But I think the same is valid even for small and medium customers.
Yeah, I'd
Um,
say this tool and the approach you're talking about is also very aligned to that VCDX methodology.
yeah.
Is really justifying what we're doing, documenting what we're doing and why, so that we can get successful outcomes more repeatably for customers. So that's kind of what screams at me when you're talking
Yeah.
here is VCDX methodology. So that's really cool to see as well.
Oh, you'll see it in many places in the product. Like, for example, all the issues, and we have more than 25,000 of them now that we're scanning against. They're categorized in different ways, but one of the ways is based on the design quality. So availability, manageability, performance, recoverability, security.
Mm.
Each one is in that category. So you can focus in just a specific design quality of the infrastructure, or you can focus on infrastructure there. So we have compute, VM, storage, network, and so on. So it's really very much, you'll see a lot of traces from the VCDX mindset and thinking in the product. So if I think about it now, it's very well tailored for VCDXs and in general for architects. But back to the hardware compatibility analysis, what really strikes people the first time they see it is the fact that you can so easily simulate upgrades. So I can choose now for the whole environment or for some specific clusters, I can simulate upgrade to a different version. So let's say that I will choose ESXi version 8, 8.0, I'll click simulate. So it will take my whole environment now and it will show me what would happen if I upgrade to version 8.
Okay. And for those who are listening, that was basically instant. I saw a little, circle there for about a quarter of a second, and it's already changed and updated with the new status. So that's incredibly quick. So maybe you could talk us through that a bit, because I feel like an assessment to be that fast is very impressive.
Yeah, exactly. And this is, we've spoken to customers or even service providers that used to use some other assessment tools that might take for bigger environments hours or days to complete, which I think is not acceptable. You have to be able to provide results as soon as possible, within seconds, if possible.
Mm.
So throughout all these years that we were building Runecast, we made sure to optimize the performance. Actually, one of our long-term customers is the biggest VMware customer in Europe. They have 16,000 ESXi hosts, so it's a really humongous environment.
Mm.
And they use just one Runecast Analyzer instance to analyze their environment continuously. So
Oh,
actually
wow.
for them, when they signed up about 4 years ago, we had to really spend months in optimizing things in terms of performance. And if it works for them, I think it can work for anybody.
Yeah,
Pretty
oh,
much.
absolutely. I think for it to be one appliance that works. I mean, as architects, we know that sizing, say, a vCenter appliance, you have to have small, medium, large, extra large, all these things.
Yeah.
Significantly. How big is the appliance out of interest? It must be enormous to handle
Uh,
16,000, but
I think, I mean, they have it 16 gigs of VRAM, maybe 8 vCPUs. In terms of storage, probably 120 gigs, something like that. So it's not,
oh wow, okay,
too
that's really
outrageous.
small actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm surprised it's so small. Geez, your team must be pretty good at coding. Uh,
I
so
mean,
it's very good.
it took a while. Certainly, the first version of Runecast was not able to do that. But we really like, for example, the hardware compatibility. Let's say there are a lot of things under the hood that are optimized. Let's say if you have a lot of exactly the same hosts with all the settings the same, and it's deduplicating the analysis. So in order to ensure better performance. So there are a lot of optimizations that are done. Of course, in some cases, you might need to deploy multiple Runecast Analyzer instances if you have some other architectural constraints or requirements. For example, we have a defense customer that have about 100 satellite mobile units with intermittent connection to the central.
Mm.
And they, for that purpose, they needed to have an instance in each one of those mobile units, which is like a small data center.
Mhm.
And then they have a central Runecast Analyzer instance and then they collect the data. We have something called Enterprise Console, which you can enable. It's a dashboard you can enable on any of the Runecast analyzers, and you can collect all the data in one place.
Yeah, well,
So
that was
yeah,
going to be the next question. How do we look at those 100 or 1,000 or however many sites? But that sounds like a really good solution.
yeah, and it's pretty flexible if you're an architect, because you can enable this console dashboard or on any of the instances, even on multiple of them. So you don't have to define one, which is the main one, and that's collecting all the data. You have so many options, which is always great to have as an architect. I mean, you always have constraints that come from many different other angles, but it's good that the product itself, like Runecast, is not giving you constraints. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
and
No, I mean, that's very cool. And I think this simulation feature of an upgrade is a really good example. You can simulate it, you can find what the problem is. I guess we could go away, we could do a change, remediate a firmware driver, whatever, rerun that, show a before and after artifact back to the change management board, and then get approval for that upgrade. So I
exactly.
guess off the top of my head, that sounds like a really good way for, especially a large customer that has a lot of process that you have to justify everything you do. Seems
Yes.
like a pretty easy approach. So yeah, no, it's very cool.
Yeah, yeah, I would say it's pretty straightforward. So,
And I
um,
think, in fairness, I mean, we're only really looking at what looks to be a fraction of what the tool can do, but this is where a lot of customers I see have problems, is just the 101 level, which is
mhm,
just hardware and upgrades and firmware and all this stuff. So many problems, like you said earlier, stem from incompatibilities or unsupported versions. And I
yeah,
think that just having this tool that can very quickly, as we've seen literally in a minute, right, review and simulate an upgrade and tell you where the problems are. And also, I think on the earlier screen there was a proposed remediation step as well.
yeah,
So I think that's very cool and saves a lot of time.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And if you yeah, you can see exactly what version you need to go to, whether in terms of driver or firmware.
Mm.
And there is also a link to the online HCL. So if you want to read the source of where the data is coming from, of course, you have a direct link, which is actually quite difficult to find sometimes because
Mm.
for example, IO device models, they might have very similar names. So the only difference could be this IDs, this DID, SVID, SSID, which are also a bit difficult sometimes to obtain from your ESXi host or from your vCenter.
Mm.
So that's
So I
also
guess for those
useful.
listening, we've just looked at the tool, we've seen the compatibility issue. Runecast has provided a recommendation on what version to go to, as well as a link to the HCL, the online version, so we can make sure and validate that manually. So I think that's great because the tool's told you what to do, and you've given a reference to validate that recommendation. Which, if for any reason there was a bug or an issue with Runecast, you could double check and make sure it was there correctly, which is, I always recommend people, as good as software and tools can be, it's always nice to manually validate things. And that's a
Yeah,
good example of how quick and easy it is to do with Runecast. So yeah, that's
yeah.
very cool.
In fact, what I really like and what we introduced here is if you see when I hover over some of the elements, I
Mhm.
have this icon that I could just click, and if I think that for some reason I think that of course our results are as we've been running this for quite a few years, there's very few cases where somebody would report maybe a false positives.
Mhm.
But if you would like to ask a question or maybe to report a potential false positive, you could do it from many places in the interface. So this will go directly to us.
Mm.
And considering that we're not a huge corporation, we are very responsive in any feedback or any questions we get. So
Mm. No, I really like this. I think the ability to report an issue, whether it's a help desk ticket or something like that, to be able to do that quickly and easily is very important. Kudos to Nutanix; they did a good job of that when I was at Nutanix, just making it easy for customers to log a ticket,
Mhm.
forget the support bundles upgraded,
Yeah,
uploaded, and all this stuff. So in your case, yeah, a single click in the specific area
mhm.
where the recommendation is, you can ask a question straight away. I think that's a really good feature as well. But it also comes back to, no matter how good the tool is, as architects, we still should validate. Like my pet hate is people taking a sizing from a sizing tool for something like
Mm-hmm.
vSAN or Nutanix or whatever, and then just selling that
Mm-hmm.
and just trusting the tool is accurate. These tools, sometimes have mistakes in them. They might have a bug. It might be, simply that you have an edge case that doesn't
Yeah.
suit the sizing tool. So it's always important to validate. So
Mm-hmm.
again, what I like here is you can very quickly validate the HCL manually, and if there is an issue, you can report it quickly as well.
Yeah.
So I think that's really good. So well done on that.
Yeah, thanks. All the rules that we scan against, like best practices, vulnerabilities, and so on, we also always show the source. In this case, it was the HCL. In other cases, it could be, I don't know, the PCI DSS guidelines or some knowledge base article. So really to see where this came from and some information from the official organization that's providing the recommendation.
Yeah, it looks really good. And for those listening who can't see the screen, under IT operations, we've got configuration vault, we've got best practices, capacity management, KB articles, log KBs and log inspector. So we've got all these different capabilities. Do you maybe want to run us through what each of those are and give us another example? Because I think this is quite a good demo.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and let me see where to start. So I'll start with configuration vault, and this is something also that came through our own experience, but also talking to a lot of customers. Um, you know that a lot of customers that are running VMware, they're using RV tools on regular basis, even have it like a scheduled task to export the information from RV tools, which then goes to some spreadsheet, and at least you have some sort of track record that you can go back to with not all the settings, but a good amount of information for your environment, including drivers, advanced settings. Now with config vault, considering that Runecast is scanning continuously, you could set it up to scan every hour or every day. It saves a snapshot of all the data, like settings, hardware information, drivers, firmware, all of that for your VMware environment, also for your hyperscaler container or Windows Linux environment. So in Configuration Vault, you can browse through all of this data in a nice visual way. You can, of course, export it as well. But the great thing about it is that since it's scanning continuously, maybe on hourly or daily basis, you could also see the historical changes. So you could really take control of your drift, and you could see any changes that are happening in your environment. For example, in this case, from the drop-down, I will select one of my vCenters, and I can select also any 2 points in time historically. So I'll just select 2 days apart, and I will focus on my hosts because I want to see if there have been any changes on the hosts that are controlled by this vCenter between these 2 dates. And once I click apply, I can see that there have been some changes. I have 3 hosts here. The first one between these 2 dates had 1 change. The second one had 2 changes. I want to see what those changes are. And I can see that on September 6th, I had the SSH service policy on, but then September 11th, it was off already. Plus, there have been some changes in the advanced settings, which are thousands of advanced settings. Of course, in this particular case, the syslog destination changed. So the destination of where my host is sending the logs, somebody changed it. So you could catch any changes in your settings, in your drivers or hardware, anything like that,
I
which
mean,
is, by
this
the way,
would be
quite
handy for like anyone malicious potentially. It could be
yeah,
a ransomware or an external attacker, or it even could be a rogue employee or something who's disgruntled and doing something mischievous. So I think this is
exactly.
a way to find those changes, see when it happened, and then obviously then we know when that potential compromise was from and to. Which,
Yeah,
if we think from a ransomware perspective, then we know when our data or when our last good backup might be, which is
Yeah.
prior to this change. So that's where my mind went the moment I saw
That's
this.
a great use case.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
very
Especially ransomware now is for a good reason a very hot topic. So yeah, that's a great use case. Uh, Another use case and the original like requests we were getting from customers is we have a number of very large customers that have the third level support and architects directly working for the organization, and then they're contracted one of the big service providers for operations for first level, second level support. So there are a lot of admins. Some are more senior, some are more junior, and from two different organizations touching the environment. So they just want to have the visibility of any changes that are happening there. So it might have not been intentionally malicious attempts, but it could be just some maybe junior admin that didn't realize that they shouldn't have changed something.
Yeah, I think the
So,
other thing is, I mean, I've certainly seen over the years that default settings occasionally change when you do an upgraded version. It might be a minor update or it might be a major, but I've certainly seen scenarios where an advanced setting due to an upgrade has been changed, and that setting had been set for a very specific reason. And when the upgrade occurred, there was a
oh yes,
regression in terms of performance and availability and things like that. And this would have been a great tool to discover that, because I remember, having those cases escalated to me, and
yeah,
sometimes it takes a long time to work out where that could potentially be, especially when an environment is not always well documented.
yeah,
So I think this tool is not only helping you get to the root cause, it's also helping you document the environment and the
yes,
changes. So I think this is certainly a handy tool. Would have
yeah.
would have saved me a lot of time in the past, actually, Stan. Why haven't you? How long has Runecast been around?
We were out on the market in September 2015. So yeah, it's been
2015.
a while now, 8 years.
Mm.
So,
Yeah, very cool.
um, and that's a very common use case. Also, what you're describing, definitely the default settings or the settings according to the internal documentation that should be there very likely will change when you do an upgrade. And yeah, this is also another place where config vault is really important.
So
And
basically,
it's
what you could do is, if I understood you correctly, we could do a scan. Let's say it's 5 p.m. here in Melbourne. I could do a scan at 5 p.m. before my change window, and then I could do a scan at the end of my change window to make sure that what I expected to change has been changed, and what was not expected to change has also not changed.
yes, exactly.
So we get to see both sides of it. And then that can be again, an artifact that we can deliver back to the business to say, this is what
Yeah,
we've done.
yeah,
Here is our successful verification of that change.
yeah,
So I think that's something that's missing in the market, is actually having quality artifacts
mhm,
that can be maintained um, when we do changes, so
yeah,
we can track them and troubleshoot. Because, yeah, like I said, it's very difficult to troubleshoot issues after upgrades. But with a
yeah.
tool like this, you certainly have a lot more chance of discovering what the root cause could be.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Because you see exactly what changed, so you know where to focus your attention.
Mm.
And this is when you do upgrades. If it's a change that happened unexpectedly during normal operations, what I wanted to show here on the screen now is you could actually see who made what changes as well at what particular time. So in the configuration changes tab, you can see exactly what changed between these two dates. And in tasks, you could see only within this period who made changes, which user, and what type of tasks they performed. So you can see what changed and who made the change as well.
Yeah, no, I like it. I think it's really good. It also, I guess, would be a good way for, let's say, you've done a design of an upgrade, you've assigned it to me to perform. I've gone and done the work, and then you're coming back afterwards to peer review
Yeah,
what I've done. This would also be a tool to be able to do a peer review. So,
yeah,
yeah, I think, lots of use cases here.
yeah. And that's very common. Like at IBM, I used to do this fit gap analysis with customers, where doing assessment and checking their environment against best practices, against the also the design that was built, and 6 months down the line, things were misaligned again because some changes happened over time. So this is really a great way how to kind of take control of that.
Yeah, sure. Actually, one thing I wanted to ask, and it's a hot topic. I love talking about best practices. So talk to me about what the product does around best practices, and I feel like you're going to have some of your VCDX experience in there that's going to be fun. So yeah, let's maybe touch on that tab and see where this conversation goes.
Yeah. So with the best practices, we've really implemented the standard best practices from the particular vendor, and let's focus on VMware. Again, as you can see here, I have AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, Kubernetes. So we have best practices, even actually Nutanix best practices. So these are specifically for Nutanix with VMware. But if I look at vSphere, maybe, these are very standard best practices that you'll recognize immediately. Making sure that SSH is disabled, NTP is running and set to start and stop with the host. From security perspective on the port groups, ensure that force transmits, MAC address changes is set to reject. So a ton of things. We have also best practices that we developed in collaboration with VMware, which is for SAP HANA on VMware specific best practices. Sometimes we have just the standard vendor best practices. Sometimes it's more specific ones like VMware with Nutanix or SAP HANA on VMware. So
this all looks really good to me, because I think, we won't go through each of these individually, but for those listening and those who maybe haven't got an operational background, a lot of these very simple settings, if you change them, it could be a huge security risk. Like the forged transmits, for example, could be a huge security risk if you use or not. And having NTP or not can, again, cause problems down the track. And it's just simple little things that people neglect. And I think a tool like this helps remind us that we need to make sure these things are set. And also make sure they remain set. It's not just day one; it's that day N operations. So that's really cool. So what I was going to ask is, I've seen in my time doing a lot of business critical apps. Unfortunately, sometimes we have to change default settings and use advanced settings and things like that for very specific niche use cases. Are we able to either modify the default checks here or add our own custom ones into the tool?
What we have implemented is customization for a lot of the rules. So you can customize the parameters exactly for these reasons. So there are a few things you can do, because you could have very good reasons to deviate from best practices, right? If the general rule was just go with the best practices, we probably wouldn't have jobs as architects, but there's always... it's a good starting point, but there's of course always deviations based on requirements, constraints, and of course you always have to justify the deviations. There are a few things you can do within Runecast. One is, if you don't want this to be checked at all for part of your environment, you can filter out the specific issue. And we have very granular filters, so you could filter out down to specific hosts or virtual machines. So you could really choose where this rule should not apply, which will be
so basically we might, in my example, have a Oracle RAC environment where we want to change things significantly, and then we might have the rest of our environment where the typical best practices may apply, and we can filter the rule based on those different environments. That's very cool.
Exactly, and that's one thing you can do. And another thing is, if you wish, so you could filter it out completely, or you could just add a note, which will then appear in all the reports why this is a deviation and should be there. Maybe you've planned a change a month from now, or there's another reason that you want to kind of explain here. Or so the rule would still be valid and it will still be checking everything, but you could see the annotation in all the reports and in the user interface. Or as mentioned, you can filter it out completely on just a portion of your environment, like specific cluster, as you mentioned, or maybe group of virtual machines. And you can add the justification there as well, why it's filtered out.
Yeah, I really
Or
like actually the fact that you can put a note in because that's
yeah,
kind of documenting within the tool. They don't have to look
mhm,
up a separate document or find the document or potentially create the document if it doesn't even exist. But the fact that it's in the tool, and you mentioned
yeah,
when you create a report, that note is visible in the report.
yeah,
Again, I think that's really good for operational verification. It's good for justifying the configuration of a host or an environment. So, yeah, very cool.
yeah. And for some of the rules, and we have a few hundred of them already, but we can very easily enable, or maybe even 1,000 already, but we have a lot of the rules that are customizable. So you could change the parameters of what it's actually checking against. Like
Mhm.
in this case, we have a rule that is just checking for your CPU overcommitment ratio. So looking at number of virtual CPUs you have in a cluster versus number of physical CPU cores. And by default, it's looking at 4 to 1, virtual to physical CPU, but
I
you can
think
change
that
that.
was our documentation back at IBM, wasn't it? It was 4 to 1 was
Yes.
the rule of thumb, but which has held true actually. I would say over the years, 4 to 1
Yeah.
is a pretty good starting point. But I think this is a great example actually because I've had customers who they want to put business critical apps in an environment and they don't want to create silos and have multiple clusters. So they want to kind of scale out and get the efficiency and economy of scale of a larger cluster, especially on a HCI type solution, vSAN or Nutanix. And they were concerned about CPU overcommitment.
Yeah.
And I think a setting like this, where you're checking to make sure that you haven't overloaded that cluster, which has mixed workloads that might have,
Yeah.
an SQL or an Oracle or something like that, which really needs to be sort of 2 to 1 or less
Yeah.
on average, and other workloads, which test dev might be 6 or 8. But
Mhm.
I think this overall average is quite a good metric to track so that you don't over time get degradation. And, people always like increasing CPU counts for some reason. It's a bit of a pet hate of mine. So
Yeah.
I quite like this example you've brought up. So I think that's going to be quite valuable.
Yeah, and certainly the customization part of it will be used and is used by customers in some cases. As you mentioned, test dev, or there could be a VDI cluster where typically also customers are looking at higher overcommitment ratios on CPU than 4 to 1, or as you said, more mission critical applications that really you don't want to risk, or you have to account with n-1 or n-2 and still keep the performance. So in that case, you could certainly add a custom value and scope it to just specific either vCenter or virtual data center or cluster to monitor only against that particular custom value.
Mm.
And you have similar for memory overcommitment and really many other issues that we scan against. Actually, this is a nice segue to one of the other options we have here, which is something that we've recently added. It's fairly lightweight, but I believe it can be very useful for customers that maybe don't have a separate software for that, which is the capacity management.
Mm.
And this was not the original intent of Runecast, but we've had this request over the years that can give me really a lot of information. But it will be really useful to have also something related to capacity, like the usage, the overcommitment ratios from CPU and memory perspective. We're going to add storage very soon as well. And here you could see all of your clusters. We have some customers that have hundreds of clusters or more. So you could see that maybe the top ones that have the highest overcommitment ratio in a nice visual way. So CPU overcommitment, memory overcommitment. And also it's great that you can simulate failed hosts. Like some customers need to make sure that they would have good performance even if one or two or more hosts fail. So you could, again, select from a drop down, for example, one or two failed hosts, and you can see how this would affect your overcommitment numbers and also
You know
CPU
what?
memory
Now, I've got
usage.
to say, this is probably my favorite part of the tool so far.
Really?
Uh, because one of I mean, most people who've read my blogs or know me know that I always talk about resiliency and I'm always talking about N+1 or N+2 or whatever. And it really bugs me that vendors will size an environment without N+1. Or if it's, a failures to tolerate 2 or an RF3 on Nutanix, they don't consider that those additional hosts need to be there and factored in. And customers run into problems without this. And I think this tool is great because obviously it's agnostic. It's not just HCI. It can do, your pure storage or whatever. And it can show you across all your different environment types. And this simulation, the simulation of the upgrades was great as well. I've got to say that this one takes the cake for sure. Yeah. So for sure, I'm going to use this. Next time I do a current state assessment, I'm going to show customers, I'm going to say, hey, here's what it looks like if you have a failure. Here is the associated risk statement, which we do as part of course, of our architecture. And here is what you should be doing to mitigate these issues. Because, in the example where you had a failed host, you had one of them which was well and truly in the red. And overcommitment was too high and, all that stuff. So I think this is a great visual for customers also who are doing things like budgeting. Like we take our technical hat off for a second. Okay, we need to think about budget. All right, what problems are we trying to solve in our environment, both technical and business? This tool, I feel like, is giving us a lot of information at the physical layer that we need to map back to the business outcomes, and then put together that budget and that strategy piece. So I feel like it's a very cool tool and looks very easy to use as well. So my first impression is definitely a good one.
Yeah, thanks for that.
And by the way, Stan's not paying me for this podcast. I think, Stan, you should be paying me.
I know.
Great advertising.
No, I thanks very much. And I knew that it will resonate with you just because we have similar thinking as VCDXs and we faced similar problems. So I'm really happy to hear such feedback, especially coming from you. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no, it's a really good tool. And to be honest, I quite intentionally didn't do much research on Runecast before this podcast because I like to give my initial impression and my natural impression. Obviously, for those watching, you see my facial expressions and things like that. But yeah, I think the tool is very cool. So I'll definitely be syncing up with you after this to get access to it to play with on a few customers. Because I've got a few I'm working with at the moment who I think would be quite interested, just to get a bit of an idea of what the tool can do. So,
it's the best to just test it in production. To see what it can do, and the fact that you could actually show them the results within minutes, and I think deploying it wouldn't take more than 15 minutes, and in a minute or two you'll already see the results. So, it will be great for you to do that. I wanted to show you also here, it's another common use case for day-to-day big organizations that they have new projects coming in that require them to maybe provision 20, 30 or whatever more virtual machines in specific clusters. So here you could also simulate adding certain number of VMs of a certain size and to see how this would affect your clusters. What I've just done is I configured number of VMs, average VM, CPU, and memory allocation, and expected CPU memory usage. So this will just apply this information across my clusters and will look at if I were to provision these VMs of this size, how would this affect each one of my clusters if I provision in the first, the second, the third cluster. So that also is something that our customers are definitely seeing a lot as a use case.
This reminds me of a use case back at IBM. Actually, a customer was deploying a large VDI environment, and they actually asked me because I was kind of, this is one of the examples of something was deployed and it wasn't the best outcome ever, and I said, look, I think you're overloading this environment, and I put together a fairly rudimentary spreadsheet with the number of VDI users they had currently. And I showed them on that spreadsheet, a very rudimentary version of what you've just showed me here, and showed them that, hey, if you added another 100 users to this environment, it's going to be in the red, right? You're going to run out of CPU or memory, or your CPU overcommit's going to be too high. So again, very aligned in our thinking. You've just done a much better job of creating a tool than I did with an Excel spreadsheet. But the effect is the same, though. It shows you what the outcome is. And I think for any architect or admin that's listening, I feel like this tool is a really good way to justify that you can support additional workload, but also to highlight what your limits are so that your organization can plan budgeting to scale and things like that for new projects. So I think there's a lot of value in that simulation feature. So you're not just simulating upgrades and showing what that looks like. You're simulating scaling, adding more resources, or it might be a new project that the business is asking you to support. And this tool would enable you to capacity plan for that. So, there's certainly a wide range of use cases with this data that's very valuable.
Yeah, that's why recently we started to kind of market the Swiss Army knife for VMware teams, because it's not just VMware now; it's also cloud containers and so on. But we were at VMware Explore in Vegas just a few weeks ago, and that was resonating a lot because now we've added so many capabilities from best practice analysis, configuration drift management, these capacity simulations, a lot of security and compliance stuff. So it's really, I think, many of the things that an admin would need. And that's really our mission of making admins' lives easier, or also architects' lives easier. So
I was going to say, it's not just a tool for operations, it's also a tool for architects. And I mean, something that I certainly hold close to my heart is when I architect a solution, and I said this on a previous episode as well, but I always try and put my operational hat on. And I ask myself, would I really want to look after this environment? And if the answer is no, then I've got to fix that. Like, I can't hand over something in good faith to an admin if I wouldn't want to look after it myself. So I think this tool is not only good to make sure day one looks good, day two looks good, but ongoing, the admin and the architect, who should always work closely together. It shouldn't be just a throw the ball over the fence type situation with architects and engineers and admins, but this tool would work for both roles.
Exactly. And it's a great thing that's very kind to operations people that you ask yourself this question. Actually, if you would be happy managing this environment in the future, that's a great. I think any architect should actually ask themselves that.
I mean, if we don't ask ourselves that question, then we can make any decision we like, and then the implication just falls onto someone else. But that's obviously not a customer-centric approach. Whether you're an external consultant or you're an internal architect, you still have to hand that environment over to someone typically. And if you are, let's say, a one-man band and you're in a small customer where you do architecture, you do support, you do implementation, you do everything, then of course you're going to think of the implication for operations, because it's going to fall to you to fix. So that's just my approach. It helps make good decisions and helps keep my colleagues and customers happy.
And also get good references after that, right? Because sooner or later they will actually get into the day-to-day operations, and they will see the results of the design.
I think that what I like quite a lot is this tool is really allowing us to plan. So even if day one as architects we don't have enough information, to plan everything out because we just don't have the information, or the customer is not sure where they're going to go, at least when we implement something, we can say, all right, we at least now have a tool that once the information becomes available, we can input that information and see where we stand, and we know where we're going to go from there. So I think this is a good tool to help with capacity management. Obviously, that's what the tab is called. So, but I think it's very handy for sure.
And by the way, capacity management is something that we've added just recently, just before VMware Explore, so August 2023. But we've been asked for this capability for many years.
Well, to be honest, it looks very polished already. So for a very new product, or for a very new feature of your product, I should say, it's very clear. And obviously, when you look at information, if you were to give me 100 clusters worth of information, it would be overwhelming. I'd have
Yeah.
to read through it all, it'd be difficult. But for those listening who didn't see the demo, you've put like the top 5 clusters in
Yeah.
each of the different categories at the top. So it's very easy to see what the most important things for you to address are.
Hmm.
So that's what I said. It looks very polished to me that you can look at your memory or you can look at your CPU and see where your issues are. And I know you mentioned you're going to add the storage component in there in a
Yeah.
future release, but I think already memory and CPU information to this level is very
Mhm.
valuable. So it's something I've seen bits and pieces of in other tools, and in other
Yeah.
tools you might have to create your own dashboards and whatever. But
Mhm.
I think out of the box, this is very good.
Yeah, and thanks for saying that. Out of the box is really key term that we try to follow. That you should not have to be an expert or configure many different things to actually get valuable insights. And yeah, the other things you mentioned is really to uh, not create more noise, but really to show you the information that you would normally focus on, like the top 5 things. And that's what we strive to do all the time, not to create more confusion, more noise for our users, but really to give them the information that they need. And everybody's attention span is also quite short, and
Mm.
they don't need more noise, which I feel a lot of the tools out there are inevitably leading to giving you a lot of problems, a lot of issues out there, a lot of noise that, yeah, it's not very productive in general.
Yeah, I mean, I
Um,
think anyone can gather the information. I think that there's
yeah,
many ways, like you mentioned, RV tools, very easy to get a lot of information, but very difficult to get a good visual on your, say, top 5 issues.
yeah,
And just on this screen we're looking at, I can see, the CPU usage of the top few clusters and memory usage and overcommitment. So I know, okay, cool. I can see overcommitments in the red for this cluster. I'm going to dive in and get that one sorted, and then I
yeah,
can move down the list to the next one, and eventually they're all going to be green. And I don't
yeah,
really need to go all the way down the list because they're all well within those predefined thresholds that you showed us earlier.
yeah,
Um, so I think that's really good. And one thing that springs to mind here is this really demonstrates a great example of why product management teams should be engaging experienced architects when designing their products,
oh yeah, yeah,
because straight away we're both VCDXs. We're on the same page in terms of methodology. We have the experience in what works, what doesn't, and how to approach engagements. And I've seen some tools where the concept is fantastic, but the
yeah,
execution is horrible. It's just
mm,
it could have been an amazing product, but they just didn't have an expert architect who
yeah,
understood the technology piece and could map it back to the business to then create the product requirements documents and the
yeah,
minimally viable product standards. So yeah, for anyone out there who's developing a product around technology, this is just a great example of get a really good architect like Stan, especially if they've gone through something like VCDX, and help them design your product, because this is a great example of
yeah.
a tool that does a lot of things and aligns very closely to a well proven methodology like VCDX.
Yes, and that's an awesome tip. Really, that's, I think, make it or break it tip for a lot of tech companies. In fact, so I hope a lot of people are listening and kind of decision making positions that could take this advice now, because I think that's one of the reasons why we managed to be successful in being so capital efficient is really us, the architects, the experts who have experienced all of these problems and have designed a lot of different environments, seen a lot of use cases, we're actually doing the product management part as well. And of course, as you said, yeah, the architect doesn't have to be in the product management role. They could be just involved and could be the advisor. So that would work as well. But yeah, to
Absolutely.
me, this
In
is,
my opinion, and I've tweeted similar things, a successful product manager needs to have a very close working relationship with both the architects and the engineers. And
yeah,
the three of them combined create a great
mm,
outcome. But if you
yeah,
only have 2 out of 3, you might have the best product manager and the best engineers, and I've definitely seen this before, but where they don't involve architects, things don't go
yeah,
well. They
yeah,
don't know what the success criteria or the minimally viable product is, or they
Mm.
can't define, what the feature needs to achieve
Yeah.
against a technical or a business outcome, and they miss, and they put all
Yeah.
this time and effort into features that don't actually deliver a business outcome. And
Mm.
like you say, that's just a waste of capital. So in your case, you've been efficient with capital because you defined what you wanted to do. It's very clear you've put a lot of thought into this, and you've developed the features that are the best bang for the buck.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think
Exactly.
it's a great validation for the VCDX program that someone like you has founded a company and built a tool that's addressed a gap in the market. Certainly, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Josh. As I said, yeah, it means a lot coming from you, especially. And yeah, just to maybe reiterate what you said for everyone. So, a product manager, architect, and engineer is like the holy three that could lead to success. Yeah, you're right, because engineers and architects have different angles for
Mm.
sure, and architects are certainly closer to what is expected from a business outcome perspective
Mm.
as well.
Yeah,
Um,
and I always say that as an architect, it's my job to translate the business side to the technical side, and then back in the opposite direction. Um,
mm,
and that's what a product manager needs. They need someone who can talk technical and business and understand both realms. And
mm,
there's a lot of brilliant engineers that I know and have worked with over the years, and some of those have that capability. But
yeah,
some of them are just amazing at coding, right? And they don't
yeah,
have, maybe that consulting skill set to be able to go between customers and product managers and engineers and architects. But that's the job of an architect, you know,
mm,
and especially a VCDX style architect who can do the enterprise architecture piece, focusing more on the business, and also the solution architecture piece um, is really the dream.
yeah,
Architect you want on your team is the one that can map both business and technical.
mhm, yeah,
Otherwise, you have an enterprise architect, a solution architect, a product manager, and an engineer, and then that becomes your dream team. But
yeah,
uh,
yeah,
I think the combination is critical. I certainly don't think I can be the engineer and the product manager as well. So I think all three roles are very important. But
yeah,
I think any one of those that are missing is certainly to the detriment of the outcome.
yeah, yeah. I fully agree. And just to show you on this screen that we see here, but it's all the issues when you're mentioning that this is really developed with the VCDX mindset. What I mentioned earlier in the podcast is that all the rules or issues with Canagest, in this case, it's knowledge-based articles.
Mm-hmm.
They're categorized based on the design quality, if it's availability, manageability, performance, security, recoverability, and also based on the layer, compute, network
Mm.
storage. And in fact, like in this particular case, the severity, which is another place or another parameter that allows you to really focus where it matters. So on the critical or major issues in this case, it's influenced by the layer and the design quality the particular problem affects. So for example, if it is compute, network, or storage, and if it's security or availability, which are two of the typically biggest problematic areas or those that are most critical for customers, this would drive a higher level of severity.
Mm.
And if a problem is categorized as maybe VM, so only individual virtual machines are affected, and it could be manageability. Maybe
Mhm.
it's not critical. It could be medium or it could be low. So this is also the layer of the infrastructure and the design quality that a particular issue is addressing is also driving the severity that we have calculated. So again, to focus customers' attention to what they need to fix first and what is the highest risk in their environment. And
And certainly, I
yeah,
can see it clearly mapped back to the VCDX methodology as well. So
yeah,
yeah, I think this is a great tool. Certainly, any VCDX candidates out there, maybe fire up Runecast and do a few assessments, and might help fast track your VCDX progress.
yeah, that's also another great tip. And by the way, we offer free NFR licenses for any V expert, so they can certainly download Runecast, deploy it, use their NFR license, or even play with the online demo. Yeah, and by the way, what I'm showing here is the analysis against the knowledge base, which was the very first reason why we started Runecast and the very first capability that we implemented, because a lot of the problems that we had to firefight led back to a knowledge base article. For example, one big problem we had, I don't remember the exact knowledge base article, but it was something with some advanced settings of heap memory, advanced settings for ESXi hosts, combined with the total amount of storage the particular host is controlling, or data stores that are connected to it. There was a knowledge base article that if you have this combination of situations like advanced settings, setup, and amount of data stores you have, you might run into purple screen of death.
I actually remember it. There was one that Nutanix hit in the very early days, which was exactly that. We had to change, I think, the heap setting. So, funnily enough, you give that example. I remember that pain. It took ages to work that out, but there you go.
Yeah. I mean, that was it was unexpected at the time. We didn't know what it was, and I remember our IBM management told us. We discovered it after maybe 2 weeks of root cause analysis that it was based on that issue, because we didn't know that the heap memory settings were different also on the different ESXi hosts. And then the IBM management, because of the big business impact it had with that one customer, they asked us to check all the other customers that we're supporting to make sure that they don't have that risk for that particular
Actually, I think we worked on this one together at IBM without divulging the customer. I remember actually one environment where this became a big issue, and it was a VDI environment actually. And when they were doing the recompose of the desktops, they would hit this issue, and they would just purple screen just constantly. And it was exactly that issue. So, yeah, I've seen it a few times. I've seen it at IBM. I've seen it at Nutanix, and Runecast would have picked that up and probably made those crit sit war rooms a bit nicer places to be if we knew what the issue was at the time.
Yes, and actually, if we were using Runecast, systematically, we would have not had the crit set call at all, because it tells you in advance, you will likely run in purple screen of death because of this combination of settings you have. So it allows you, it gives you the opportunity to prevent problems like that from happening as well. Because it will
that's an amazing capability, because I can tell you for sure, or for those listening, I mean, Stan knows because we actually worked on the same project, but the amount of man hours that goes into some of these crit sit war rooms, or critical situation war rooms, they're called, it's all hands on deck. They get the best people from all the different departments. We all get in a room and we don't go home. This is way before COVID, right? We're all in a room. We're all eating pizza and drinking soft drink until the situation is resolved. So very costly for both the customer, but also very costly because a high impact to the customer, and it's a high impact to the vendor because they have to resource the resolution and do these hourly, in some cases, calls to update customers, and it's incredible cost. So a tool that can minimize or even prevent some of these is extremely valuable.
Yeah, and that was our really first, together with best practices analysis, was the first capabilities that we actually introduced, because as you described, this crit sit situations were absolutely crazy, and the cost on both customer and vendor are really huge typically. So and that's when we first presented Runecast back at VMworld in September 2015. We saw almost tears in the eyes of a lot of admins, because we saw the pain that they had to go through, and then when they saw that something like this would have actually prevented things from happening, that was a great moment for us also to see, yes, it really resonates with people. It's really hitting on pain of a lot of admins are experiencing in day-to-day operations. So that continues to be a really super strong capability, because also not only the knowledge base, but we sometimes implement things that we validate from blog articles. We even have a curated list even of Twitter accounts of influencers that sometimes might start talking about a problem that is not maybe documented by the vendor yet.
Mm.
So we've had cases in the past where we've included such things before even the vendor officially posted something. But yeah, that's really helping customers be more proactive and really prevent big problems and stressful situations as well.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you leverage, the V community and social media to potentially discover problems, but also to have probable solution or possible solutions to those problems as well. Because certainly over the years, I've used Twitter and contacts that, in many cases, I've still not met to this day in person
Yeah,
to help resolve customer problems in a timely manner because they happen to be the expert in that area, or someone like a William Lamb who puts out amazing content on his blog. Like all that stuff goes back to creating good outcomes for customers. And people put out blogs, and I used to put out blogs every time I found a problem. I would just put out a blog, and here's the problem I
I
had, here's what it was, and you put it up, and you get
yeah,
like 5,000 hits in a
exactly.
day because everyone else found the same problem with googling it, and mine happened to be the first article they hit. But yeah, that's
Yeah,
certainly valuable using social media, even if you have to market as like a social media potential solution and not an official
yeah,
one. I
yeah,
think it's valuable to have access to that information,
yeah,
and for the lead architect and the crit sit manager or the critical situation manager to use that information as part of their troubleshooting.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And we also are. It's a massive amount of online data as well. So what really helps us is an internal platform that we built. We call it. It's abbreviation. We call it RICA. It stands for Runecast AI Knowledge Automation. And we've plugged in all of these sources of information that I've talked about, like the hardware compatibility list, the knowledge bases, also this created Twitter accounts, documentation, official vendor documentation, vulnerability databases, known exploited vulnerability database, and so on. And it's automatically detecting any new pieces of relevant human readable unstructured data or updated pieces of relevant data, like, for example, updated knowledge base article, and then translating those into machine readable rules, which are validated by our engineers, especially those that are not so structured. Some of it is fully automated, but that really helps us to be very efficient to maintain the biggest and most accurate set of rules, which we have over 25,000 of them already,
Mm.
and to really help our customers stay on top of the latest issues out there. Um,
Fantastic. So, again, putting you on the spot. So, VMware releases a new version tomorrow. How quickly does Runecast have the support for that new version or new patch? Let's say it's 8 update 4 or something like that.
it's typically if it's like a big update like that or a totally new version, it takes about 2 weeks for us to support that. It also depends, like the hardware compatibility. Sometimes it comes later, like
Mm.
even after the official GA. It happened a few times that maybe the hardware compatibility and the security hardening guides might come 1 or 2 weeks later. So we might add support for it in certain parts of Runecast, and then we'll have to wait for, let's say, the hardware compatibility to be fully
Mm.
out, or the security hardening guides to be fully
Mm.
out to
I mean,
add
in
that.
fairness to you, that's pretty quick, right? I mean, if
Oh
you told me
yeah,
it would be 3 months, I would have said, "Oh, that's pretty good." Like
yeah,
enterprise customers are not going to do it in 3 months anyway. So the fact that
exactly,
you're doing it, measured in weeks, I think that's it's pretty impressive as well. So
yeah. In case there is, in another cases, if there are some security vulnerabilities, especially these highly critical ones, then it's
mm,
within hours or it's within 24 hours that we actually add it to the product. So
mm,
customers can check. For example, Log4j was, all the Log4Shell vulnerabilities end of December 2021.
mm,
Things were changing by the hour when there were new attack paths discovered, new Log4j vulnerabilities. So we were releasing updates, sometimes several updates within 24 hours, to make sure that, yeah, the customers are really protected against the latest, and considering also all the workarounds, because there were no patches in the beginning, just
mm.
workarounds. So
Yes.
also to make sure that we don't report on false positives.
Mm.
So yeah, that was in some cases it's within hours, and we just release a definition update instead of an application update.
Can you maybe show us what a definition update looks like in the product?
Well, I mean, everything that you see here in terms of rules or HCL data or anything like that, it's part of a definition update. So that's pretty much the I would say the best way to describe it, because generally this is where you configure updates in the settings, in the updates in the updates section, and here you can actually decide, or you can upload just the definition update,
Mm.
or what most of our customers do, they don't care about updates at all because they have it set to be fully automated. So they don't
Oh,
touch this. They just maybe configured connection to our central repository through a secure proxy, and it will just automatically update itself anytime it detects that there's something new, either definition or application update.
mm.
And this is the recommended way. We do have air-gapped customers, especially in the defense and military or European financial services organizations that run Runecast air-gapped, or in some cases they have local repository for the updates that
Mhm.
is in a DMZ zone and then connected to Runecast, which is in a really more isolated network. So there are different ways how you could solve it architecturally. You could have it like fully air gapped and just upload the definitions here, or attach ISO with the application update to the virtual machine and perform the update this way.
Oh, great.
But
So
yeah,
basically, just fully automated. We just put it fully automated. We don't worry about it. And
yeah,
so if we schedule, say, an hourly scan, the next hourly scan from like now it's almost 6 p.m. in Melbourne. So a scan happened at 5, a definition happened somewhere between while we've been talking, and then at 6 p.m. it's going to, scan on those new things and report
exactly.
potentially new issues to address.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
fantastic.
yeah, and we have all the capabilities like REST API. You can trigger a scan or do everything that you can do with the user interface through REST API. You could also trigger manual analysis at any time as well. So, or you could just rely on the regular scan. We have all kinds of integrations like ServiceNow, Jira, and email reports if you wish. So you don't have to go back to the interface all the time, but
Mm.
only, let's say, if you're alerted that there's some serious issue that's happening. Yeah, and I mean, you asked me to show you everything under the IT operations section, so I'm continuing down the list, but please stop me at any point.
I was
There's
going to say,
really
I
quite
think
a lot.
you've given a great demo. So, I mean, we could probably spend all day talking about this. And what I
Yeah,
was going to say is, again, I'll put you on the spot since we've known each other a long time. I can give you a hard
all right.
time. I think
Okay.
what we should do is you and I should use the tool on one of my customers. We'll do a current state assessment. We'll do a health check. We'll do a ransomware assessment. We'll go through and do all the stuff that end-to-end enterprise architecture does. We'll add the tool into it, and
Yeah.
then we can do a bit of a case study
Yeah.
on those customers or customer, depending on how many I can get to use the tool initially. And then I can tell everyone listening, you know, what it helped with, and maybe we'll do a bit of product development as well. Maybe there'll be a new feature we
Yeah.
can work on together.
That sounds great. Yeah, I mean, yeah, we'll have them two VCD access, pitching into the product. So that would be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Uh,
I think it's a great tool, and I think there's a lot that it can do clearly. So I think it's definitely worth a follow up episode. After I've actually used the tool in
yeah.
the field and talked about some real world problems. And if one or more customers are willing to come on and join us, maybe we can do sort of a 3-way call and talk to some of those situations and what their thoughts were and
Yeah.
share that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great, especially when you test it in real environments. And we of course have a lot of like official case studies, and we recently started doing something that we called Customer Insight Hour, which is just internal, but we invite a customer once a month, and they show us how they're using Runecast, what they like, what they don't like. So and everybody in the company in Runecast can join, because I don't want just product management or just specific part of Runecast to be there, but anybody from HR or finance and so on should be able to join in and see how this is our baby is perceived and how it's helping, how maybe it can be improved. So yeah, things like that are really the best way to shape the product even to be more valuable. So it will be great
Perfect.
if we could do that.
Well, we can definitely do that, and we can do that, and the whole world can listen in, and yeah, we can do a real world case study on that, because I think it'll be a good one. And I think part of the purpose of this podcast is to demonstrate or talk to our experiences in the past, get some really smart people like yourself on, talk about problems, talk about how we solve them, and what it looks like. And I think doing a case study on Runecast is going to be fun. I'll certainly enjoy it. So even if it's only for my benefit, I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That will be definitely interesting.
Very good. Well, look, Stan, I can't thank you enough for coming on. I think it's been really fun. And I definitely I'm going to hold you to helping me with a couple of customer engagements.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the customers will appreciate having your expertise as well. And we'll definitely get you back on and we'll do a case study. So thanks again, Stan. And yeah, look forward to following up and talking more about Runecast.
Likewise. Thanks for having me, Josh.
Thank you. Cheers.